A high-end gala in Seoul. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz. Suddenly, a crash of glass. Total silence. Close up on a white silk shirt soaking up dark red wine. The music stopped. The gasp from the crowd was audible. On the chest of Ji-Hoon Kang, the most feared man in Seoul, a massive stain of Cabernet Sauvignon was spreading across his pristine white custom suit. The waitress, Mia, stood frozen, holding the empty glass. Ji-Hoon's face contorts in pure rage. He grabs Mia's wrist violently. The bodyguards step forward, hands on weapons. Ji-Hoon didn't just look angry, he looked murderous. He gripped her wrist hard enough to bruise, ready to order her execution for the humiliation. But Nia didn't beg for her life. Instead, she pulled him closer, her eyes locking onto him with terrifying intensity. "Don't look up," she hoisted, her voice calm but deadly serious. "Go to the bathroom. Now." A laser dot was on your heart. Ji-Hoon's eyes widened in shock. He looks from her face to the balcony. A champagne glass near them suddenly shatters from a sniper bullet. "Stay with me, because that spilled wine didn't just ruin a shirt, it saved the underworld's most dangerous man from a bullet." 3 minutes before the incident, Ji-Hoon Kang was arguably the most terrifying man in the hemisphere. He moved through the ballroom of the Grand Seoul Hotel not like a guest, but like a shark gliding through a tank of ornamental fish. The gala hummed with the polite, nervous chatter of the city's elite, corrupt assemblymen, tech heirs, and rival gang leaders, masquerading as legitimate CEOs, but wherever Ji-Hoon stepped, the conversation died. It was the instinctive silence of a jungle when a predator snaps a twig. He wore white. In a room of black tuxedos and dark intentions, his suit was a blinding, arrogant declaration of untouchability. In the underworld, blood and oil stained everything they touched. So wearing white was Ji-Hoon's way of saying he was above the filth. He was the viper of Gangnam, and he didn't get dirty. A young server approached his table, carrying a silver tray of crystal flutes. The boy's hand was trembling so violently that the champagne rippled in the glasses. Ji-Hoon didn't look at him, but he stopped mid-stride. He turned his head slowly, a movement that was mechanical and precise. "Stop," Ji-Hoon said. The word was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the jazz music like a razor. The server freezes, his face drains of color. He looked ready to drop to his knees. Ji-Hoon reached out, his manicured hand hovering near the boy's throat. The surrounding guests held their breath, expecting violence. Instead, Ji-Hoon reached past the fear and straightened the boy's crooked bow tie. "Chaos breeds mistakes," Ji-Hoon murmured, his eyes dead and cold. "And I do not tolerate mistakes. Leave." The boy scrambled away, nearly tripping over his own feet. Ji-Hoon adjusted his cuffs, ensuring the heavy gold links were perfectly aligned with his wrist bone. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than the building they were standing in. 8:14 p.m. The peace treaty signing was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. He took a sip of sparkling water, his gaze scanning the mezzanine. He had calculated every variable for tonight. The exits were covered. His men were stationed at the elevators. The metal detectors were calibrated to catch even a razor blade. He had curated this night to be a sterile, bloodless carving of territories. He loved order. He worshipped control. As he smoothed the lapel of his immaculate white jacket, he felt a smug satisfaction. Nothing could touch him. He was the Architect of this world, and every soul in this room was just a brick in his design. He didn't see the girl in the black leather dress weaving through the crowd. He didn't see the tray of red wine. And he certainly didn't see the laser dot that had just drifted onto his heart. Nia Brooks knew the art of being furniture. In a room filled with souls most dangerous predators, the safest place to be was invisible. She moved through the sea of tuxedos and backless gowns with practiced fluidity, her arms burning under the weight of a heavy silver tray loaded with Cabernet Sauvignon. She kept her eyes lowered just enough to appear submissive, but raised enough to see everything. To the guests, she was just a pair of hands holding a drink. To Nia, they were obstacles between her and next semester's nursing tuition. But as she murmured polite apologies and navigated the press of bodies, her gaze didn't linger on the diamond necklaces or the Patek Philippe watches that cost more than her entire neighborhood. She was looking at the shadows. It was a habit she couldn't break, a hyper-awareness born from growing up in a place where silence usually meant trouble. While the guests were mesmerized by the jazz band or the arrival of the terrifying man in the white suit, Nia was scanning the perimeter. She noted the exits. She noted the security guards who looked too bored to be effective. And then, she looked up. The mezzanine balcony was supposed to be empty. It was a darkened stretch of architectural flourish above the ballroom, reserved for lighting rigs and dust. But as Nia paused to let a laughing socialite pass, a flicker of movement caught her eye. It wasn't the erratic flash of a camera or the sparkle of a candlestick. It was cold, steady, and mechanical. A glint. It lasted less than a second, a reflection of the crystal lights off a curved glass lens. Nia stopped breathing. She knew that shape. She had seen it in movies, but the reality was far more chilling. It was the distinct, predatory shine of a rifle scope. Time seemed to warp, stretching out into a terrifying slow motion. Nia traced the invisible trajectory from that darkened balcony down to the floor. The angle was steep, precise, and unwavering. It didn't point at the politicians. It didn't point at the tech moguls. It cut a straight line through the smoky air, landing directly on the only object in the room bright enough to serve as a perfect bullseye. The man in the white suit. He was standing near the center of the room, checking his cufflink, completely oblivious to the fact that he was already dead. The laser dot hadn't appeared yet, or maybe it had, lost in the fabric of his jacket, but Nia knew what was coming. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The tray in her hand suddenly felt light, her own survival instinct screaming at her to run, to drop the wine and dive for the kitchen doors. But her eyes were locked on the man's chest, and the terrifying certainty that in 3 seconds, that pristine white silk was going to turn red. The tiny red dot was no larger than a ladybug, but to Nia, it screamed louder than any siren. It crawled across the velvet shoulder of a corrupt judge, skipped over the diamond neckline of a tech heiress, and finally settled, trembling slightly, right over the heart of Ji-Hoon Kang. The contrast was sickeningly perfect. The crimson laser against the sterile white silk of his jacket. Nia's breath hitched. Her first instinct was to scream, but she choked it down instantly. The distance was time, and the sound was too slow. In a room this large, filled with the swell of a live jazz band and the drone of politicians, a scream would be lost. Even if he heard her, Ji-Hoon Kang was a man whose arrogance was thicker than armor. He wouldn't duck for a waitress. He would pause, look annoyed, and then he would die. She was 3 steps away. The sniper on the balcony was likely exhaling, the finger tightening on the trigger. She didn't have seconds, she had heartbeats. 1. 2. She didn't decide to move, her body simply obeyed the terrifying logic of the moment. If she did nothing, the man in the white suit would be a corpse before his next breath. If she acted, she might die for touching him. But standing still was not an option. Nia tightened her grip on the silver tray. She didn't fake a stumble, she launched herself. It was a calculated collision masquerading as a clumsy accident. She drove her legs forward, closing the gap with desperate speed. As she entered his personal space, a zone that his bodyguards usually kept lethal, she swung the tray upward. The movement was violent, designed to create maximum chaos. The crystal glass tipped. The expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, dark and heavy as blood, arched through the air. Nia slammed into him. Her shoulder hit his chest hard, driving him backward just as the wine made contact. The impact broke his perfect, statue-like posture. Ji-Hoon gasped, stumbling back on his heels, his eyes widening in a mixture of shock and fury as the red liquid exploded across his immaculate white forehead. She went down with him, her hands grabbing his lapels to ensure he kept moving, dragging him down and to the left. To the rest of the room, it looked like a catastrophic service failure, a clumsy girl destroying a powerful man's evening. But Nia knew the truth. She felt the rush of air where her head had been a fraction of a second ago. She had moved him out of the grave. The wine hit the silk with a wet, heavy slap that sounded sickeningly like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the illusion was so perfect that half the room wasted, expecting to see Ji-Hoon Kang clutching a chest wound. But it wasn't blood. It was a vintage Cabernet, spreading like a dark, ugly bruise across the most expensive suit in Seoul. The silence that followed was absolute. The jazz band cut out instantly. The chatter died in their throats. The only sound was the drip of wine falling from the hem of Ji-Hoon's jacket to the polished marble floor. Ji-Hoon looked down at his chest. His expression wasn't just angry, it was a portrait of disbelief that shattered into homicidal fury. He had spent 10 years building a reputation of untouchable perfection, and in 1 second, a clumsy waitress had reduced him to a stain. He reached out and seized Nia's wrist. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into her skin with enough force to bruise the bone. He jerked her upward, pulling her face inches from him. His veins bulged against the ink of his neck tattoos, his jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. "You," he snarled, the word vibrating with suppressed violence. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" His bodyguards surged forward, hands reaching inside their jackets, waiting for the signal to drag her out the back exit where screams wouldn't be heard. The guests recoiled, sensing the shift from awkward accident to execution. Nia didn't pull away. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, she used her grip to pull herself closer, eliminating the space between them until her lips were brushing her ear. The scent of spilled wine and expensive cologne was suffocating. "Don't look up," she whispered, her voice steady and sharp as a scalpel. "Go to the bathroom. Now." Ji-Hoon froze. The audacity stunned him. He tightened his grip, ready to throw her to the floor. But she dug her nails into his shoulder, anchoring him. "A laser dot was on your heart," she hissed. "I had to move you." The rage in Ji-Hoon's eyes fractured. The world has slowed down. He looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw that her pupils were blown wide with adrenaline, not clumsiness. She wasn't trembling from fear of him, she was trembling from the terror of what she had seen on the balcony. He realized then that the wine wasn't an accident. It was camouflage. His gaze flickered to the shattered glass on the floor, then back to her intense, desperate stare. The cold logic of the viper took over. If she was lying, she was dead. If she was telling the truth, standing here for one more second meant they were both dead. He didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, his grip shifted from punitive to possessive. He wasn't holding a prisoner anymore, he was holding a shield. Move, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Ji-Hoon didn't hesitate. The moment the logic clicked, the laser, the stain, the terror in his eyes, he moved with the explosive speed of a man who had survived a dozen assassination attempts. He didn't let go of Nia's wrist, instead, he yanked her sideways, hauling her off her feet and toward the arched doorway of the service corridor. Down, he roared, his voice shattering the Gala's stunned silence. A split second later, the world ended. A high-velocity crack echoed through the ballroom, sharp and deafening. The spot where Ji-Hoon had been standing, the exact coordinate where he had been checking his cufflinks moments ago, was suddenly obliterated. The bullet missed him by inches, thanks to Nia's tackle, and slammed into the 6-foot tower of moat and Shandong behind them. The impact was catastrophic. Hundreds of crystal glasses exploded in a shower of glittering shrapnel and foam. It sounded like a candlestick crashing to earth. The screaming started instantly. The polite veneer of Seoul's elite dissolved into animal panic. Guests scrambled over tables, knocking over chairs and tramping each other to get to the exits. Security guards drew weapons, shouting into earpieces that were useless in the deafening noise. Ji-Hoon didn't look back. He kept his body low, shielding Nia with his own bulk as they sprinted across the slick marble floor. He could feel her stumbling in her heels, her breath coming in jagged gasps, but he didn't slow down. He knew how snipers worked. The first shot was for precision, the second was for correction. The bathroom. Nia choked out, pointing to a heavy mahogany door at the end of the hall. It has no windows. Another shot chewed up the plaster of the wall right next to Ji-Hoon's ear, showering them with white dust. The assassin was adjusting. Ji-Hoon kicked the bathroom door open, threw Nia inside, and dove in after her. He spun around on his heel, slamming the heavy wood shut and throwing the deadbolt. He didn't stop there. He dragged a heavy marble vanity stool in front of the door, bracing it. The sounds of the massacre outside were muffled now, reduced to distant screams and the thud of running feet. Inside the bathroom, the silence was heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of expensive soap and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Ji-Hoon pressed his back against the door, his chest heaving. His white suit was ruined, stained red with wine and gray with drywall dust. He looked down at Nia, who had slid to the floor, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, waiting to see if the monster she had just saved was going to thank her or kill her. The silence inside the bathroom was heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. It was a fortress of black marble and gold fixtures, a stark contrast to the massacre happening just beyond the barricaded door. Ji-Hoon pressed his ear against the wood for a second, listening to the muffled shouting, before pushing himself away and turning his attention to the girl. The adrenaline that had fueled their sprint was beginning to curl into shock. Nia was slumped against the cold vanity counter, her chest heaving, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. The black leather of her dress was smeared with drywall dust, and her Hair, once perfectly pinned, was falling around her face. Ji-Hoon stepped into her space. The movement was predatory, but his hands, when they reached for her, were surprisingly gentle. He gripped her bare arms, turning her slightly to check her back, then her sides. He was looking for blood, real blood, not the sticky, sweet-smelling Cabernet that soaked his own chest. "Are you hit?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. Nia shook her head, unable to find her voice. She was trembling, the reality of the sniper's bullet finally catching up to her. "Look at me," Ji-Hoon ordered. He placed a hand on her chin, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed a smudge of wine from her cheek. "Check yourself. Adrenaline masks pain. Do you feel burning? Wetness?" "I'm okay," she whispered, swatting his hand away. "I'm not shot." Ji-Hoon stepped back, his back hitting the mirrored wall. He looked at his own reflection. The pristine white suit, the symbol of his untouchable status, was ruined. The red stain stretched from his shoulder to his navel, a gruesome mimicry of the fatal wound he should have received. He stared at it, then at the woman who had put it there. He had spent his life surrounded by men who would take a bullet for him only if the price was right. Loyalty in his world was a transaction. But this girl, this waitress who probably made an A-year what he spent on a single suit, had thrown herself into the line of fire without hesitation. It didn't make sense. It violated every rule of self-preservation he knew. "Why?" he asked. The word hung in the air, sharp and demanding. Nia looked up, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "Why what? You saw the laser. You knew what was coming. You could have dropped the tray and run. You could have let me die." Ji-Hoon leaned closer, his dark eyes searching hers for a hidden motive. "A hustle, a lie. Why did you save me?" Nia straightened up, pulling her dignity around her like armor. Her fear was still there, vibrating under the surface, but her voice was steady. "I'm a nursing student," she said, wiping the dust from her arms. "I've spent the last 3 years learning how to keep hearts beating. It doesn't matter who the heart belongs to." She looked at him dead in the eye. "And I don't let people die on my shift." The mahogany door shuddered under the force of a heavy boot. Thud. The wood around the deadbolt splintered with a sickening crack, and the heavy marble stool Ji-Hoon had wedged against it scraped an inch backward across the floor. "They're coming in," Ji-Hoon said, his voice flat. He scanned the bathroom frantically. It was a palace of luxury, gold faucets, plush towels, orchid arrangements, but it was devoid of anything lethal. He was the Viper of Gangnam, a man who could kill with a look, but against Kevlar and automatic weapons, he was just a target in a ruined suit. "I need a weapon," he snarled, half to himself. Nia didn't waste time searching the cabinets. She grabbed a heavy brass soap dispenser from the counter, wound up, and swung it with all her strength into the wall-to-wall vanity mirror. Crash. The sound was deafening in the small space. Shards of glass rained down into the sink like diamonds. Nia reached into the debris without flinching, ignoring the shallow cuts to her fingers, and pulled out a jagged, triangular spear of glass. It was 6 inches long, curved, and razor-sharp. She grabbed Ji-Hoon's hand, forcing his fingers around the makeshift dagger. "The neck," she whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto his. "Or the femoral artery. Make it count." The door exploded inward. The marble stool toppled over as 2 men in black tactical gear and balaclavas surged into the room, their suppressed pistols raising. They expected a co-working businessman. They found a cornered tiger. Ji-Hoon didn't wait for them to love. He lunged into the gap, closing the distance before they could adjust. He drove the mirror shard into the soft gap between the first assassin's helmet and his vest. The man gurgled and dropped, his finger spasming on the trigger, sending a spray of bullets into the ceiling tiles. The second assassin swung his weapon toward Ji-Hoon, but the Viper was already moving, using the falling body as a shield. They crashed into the shower stall, a tangle of limbs and grunts. Nia didn't freeze. She saw a third shadow looming in the doorway. She scrambled across the wet floor, not away from the danger, but toward the far wall near the exit. There, behind a discreet glass casing, was the manual fire alarm pull station. She grabbed the small metal hammer attached by a chain and smashed the glass. She yanked the lever down hard. Whoop. 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 The alarm was ear-splitting. Instantly, the emergency strobes began to flash, bathing the bathroom in a disorienting pulse of blinding white light. A second later, the overhead sprinklers hoisted to life, drenching the room in a cold, heavy downpour. The assassin in the doorway hesitated, blinded by the strobe and the sudden deluge. That second was all Ji-Hoon needed. He kicked the second gunman away, spun around, and yelled a heavy bottle of cologne at the figure in the door, striking him in the face. Ji-Hoon scrambled back to the center of the room, chest heaving, water plastering his dark hair to his skull. He felt a warm body press against his back. It was Nia. She had grabbed a heavy ceramic lid from the toilet tank and was wielding it like a club. "Watch the door," she screamed over the alarm. "I'm watching," Ji-Hoon roared back. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the freezing rain and flashing lights, the mob boss with his shard of glass and the waitress with her ceramic bludgeon, ready to take on the world. The hallway was a shocking gray tunnel. The fire alarm Nia had triggered had done more than just summon help. It had turned the corridor into a disorienting maze of flashing strobes and drifting smoke. The sprinklers hoisted relentlessly, plastering Ji-Hoon's ruined white suit to his skin and turning the expensive carpet into a sodden marsh. "Stay low," Ji-Hoon barked, grabbing Nia's arm. He didn't have his mirror shard anymore, he had dropped it to guide her. They moved toward the service exit, crouching beneath the layer of haze. Shapes materialized in the smoke ahead, silhouettes moving with military precision. For a terrifying second, Ji-Hoon tensed, ready to die fighting, until a familiar voice cut through the alarm's wail. "Boss! Secure the perimeter!" It was his head of security, wading through the smoke like a juggernaut, flanked by 6 men in dark suits. They were the Viper's fangs, finally arriving to clean up the mess. "Clear," one shouted, spotting Ji-Hoon. "Get the extraction vehicle." Ji-Hoon didn't relax. He knew that the moment of rescue was often the most dangerous. The enemy knew they were losing, desperation made them sloppy and vicious. As his men formed a protective phalanx around them, a door on the left burst open. A straggler from the hit squad, bleeding and wild-eyed, stumbled out. He didn't like for the armed guards. He swung his submachine gun toward the easiest target, the girl in the black dress. Nia didn't see him. She was looking at the exit signs, her face washed in relief. Ji-Hoon didn't think. The man who viewed human life as a ledger of debts and credits didn't calculate the odds. He simply moved. He pivoted on his heel, throwing his body across Nia's path, transforming himself into a human wall. Crack thud. The impact was like being struck by a sledgehammer. The bullet tore through the bicep of his left arm, spinning him around. Hot agony exploded in his shoulder, searing and immediate. Ji-Hoon! Nia screamed, grabbing him as he stumbled. He gritted his teeth, fighting back the black spots dancing in his vision. The hallway erupted in return fire as his men turned the lone gunman into a sieve, but Ji-Hoon ignored the noise. He looked down at his arm. Fresh, bright blood was mixed with the dark wine stain on his chest. Move, he roared, shoving Nia toward the stairwell with his good arm. Don't stop. He refused to let her see him falter. He was the Viper. He didn't bleed, he struck. But as they burst through the fire doors and into the cool night air of the alley, his knees buckled. Nia caught him, her small frame struggling under his weight, her hands slick with the rain and his blood. She wasn't looking at him with fear anymore. She was looking at him like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. 7 days later, the bruising on Nia's knees had faded to a sickly yellow, but the sound of breaking glass still made her jump. Her apartment was a shoebox on the 4th floor of a walk-up in a district the tourists avoided. It smelled of damp plaster and instant noodles, a far cry from the marble and gold bathroom where she had nearly died. She was scrubbing a coffee stain off her counter when the knock came. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a neighbor complaining about noise. It was 3 distinct, deliberate raps. Nia froze. She grabbed the paring knife she had been using to cut fruit. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept to the door. She didn't look through the peephole, she knew the wood was too thin to stop a bullet. Who is it? She called out, her grip on the knife tightening. Room service. The voice was deep, smooth, and unmistakable. Nia lowered the knife. She undid the chain and pulled the door open. Ji-Hoon Kang filled the doorframe. The contrast was almost violent. Against the peeling beige paint and the flickering fluorescent light of her hallway, he looked like a creature from another dimension. He was immaculate. His hair was slicked back, his posture rigid, and he was wearing a suit so white it seemed to glow. He wasn't wearing a sling, but Nia noticed the way he held his left arm stiffly against his side. You're hard to find, Ji-Hoon said. He stepped inside without asking, his eyes scanning the cramped room with the same critical precision he used to survey ballrooms. Security here is non-existent. I picked the lock downstairs in 6 seconds. I'm not a mob boss, Nia said, placing the knife on the counter. I don't need a fortress. You do now. He turned to face her. The cold arrogance was still there, but the lethal edge, the look he gave people right before he destroyed them, was gone. In its place was something unsettlingly intense. My enemies know your face, Nia. You can't stay here. You can't pour wine anymore. Nia crossed her arms. So what happens? You give me a bag of cash to disappear? Ji-Hoon scoffed, as if the idea offended him. Money is for employees. You are not an employee. He reached into his jacket pocket. Nia flinched, expecting a weapon, but he only pulled out a pair of sunglasses. He stepped closer, invading her space just like he had in the bathroom, only this time, there was no gunfire, only the electric hum of proximity. I don't trust anyone, he said quietly. I checked my own car for bombs. I taste my own food. But for 10 minutes in a burning building, I trusted you with my life, and you didn't flinch. He held out his good hand. It wasn't a handshake, it was an invitation. Come with me. Where? Nia asked, her breath catching. A ghost of a smile touched the Viper's lips. To the tailor. He gestured to his pristine chest. You ruined my favorite shirt, he said softly. Now you have to help me pick a new one. Nia looked at his hand, then at the open door. She didn't look back at her tiny apartment. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time in her life, she walked out of the shadows and into the light.